Hi everyone, this is a video to review, well not review, explain sanders. One of the questions we've had this week is, which sander do I buy? What do I use it for? Is it worth spending loads of money? So hopefully the selection that I've got, that I've collected over the years, will answer some of those questions. I'm going to start with a delta sander or a detail sander and a multi-tool. These are three that I've got. This was one of the first multi-tools that Bosch brought out. It was a copy of a Fane Multi-Master that everybody uses, or all the professionals use, and they've used for years. I think once the copyright ran out on the way that they build them, Bosch piled in and produced this thing. It's got a vacuum outlet and it's got interchangeable heads. This is a more expensive professional one, and I can show you the difference. This is one I've used for removing grout, for sawing holes in flooring, for sanding, and as you can see, makes quite a bit of noise. The professional version, exactly the same tool, is a lot quieter. Far easier to use for a long time, certainly inside a shower cubicle getting the grout out, but they've both got sanding heads, or interchangeable sanding heads. Machine Mart did an equivalent. This was a single speed detail sander. They called it a delta sander. Just I've knocked up a hose pipe for the end so it can be plugged into the hoover, but again, extremely noisy. Like the Bosch cheap version, they both vibrate quite a bit, but they are usable. Nothing wrong with them. And I've done a lot of skirting board, a lot of door frames, because of the small heads. They're very useful for small jobs. You couldn't do a big job. I certainly wouldn't do a tabletop. But for intricate things, cupboard doors, dead easy and not too bad. These are now variable speed in Machine Mart, and they start at about 35 quid, but that's getting pretty close to the Bosch multi-tool price of about 40 quid, 45 quid. These professional ones are around about 100 quid, but as you can see, if you're going to use it a long time, every day, they're a lot quieter. Unfortunately, they don't come with a dust extraction. This is an extra from Bosch that costs about 15 quid, which is very bad on Bosch's part, because this produces a lot of dust, as it's a sander. I hope that's clear. Okay, the next review, random orbit sanders. Pretty much what you would expect. If you ask someone to describe a sander, they'd probably come up with this. Interchangeable discs, Velcro backed, in this case Velcro backed, 5-inch 125mm standard sanders. They do 6-inch ones, they do edging sanders, all very much the same design. This is around about £80. This was around about £30, very similar to the McAllister you can buy now in B&Q. This one's a lot lighter, this one's quite a beast, and they both work well. They both blow out a fair amount of dust. The DeWalt one comes with its own little bag, but I've preferred to connect it to the hoover. This one produces very little dust if it's connected to the hoover. It's got a very good extraction system. Not too noisy, and to be honest, only a little bit more noisy than the Draper. These aren't available anymore, but they do an equivalent, but it's slightly gone up in price. I've had this years and years, so there are more expensive ones. We've had someone this week comment, why would you not buy the best you can buy? A Festool one equivalent to this, or equivalent to mini sanders, is around about 400 quid. A lot of people can't afford anywhere near that. I only got this because it was my birthday and they were looking for someone else to buy it. So, but as I say, I've used this, it's been trusty, it's been worthwhile, and I don't have any problem with it. I think Skip's got the McAllister one and he's had no problem with it. You can get the discs from 40 grit upwards and they remove a huge amount of material. But I wouldn't say they were finishing sanders. They can dig in, they can, they can make a mess of your work if you're not too careful with them. But in the main, it's my go-to sander for large areas. This is what I would call a finishing sander. It's a third sheet random orbit sander, again very cheap, very good for final finishing off a job. I've seen boat builders use them, I've seen people finish tables with them. cupboard doors, doors themselves. I've even seen people do plaster work with them. Comes with its own integral bag, but it can be connected to the hoover. But being a Black & Decker one, it's not an ideal fit for a hoover, so you'd have to modify something. I tend to use duct tape a lot of the time. It seems to work well, and it is what it is. You can use preparatory Velcro sheets, or you can use strip sandpaper, and it folds over the edges, and it's got clips front and back. So that's a cheaper way to do it than buying your own sheets. Again, very coarse grit to very fine grit, but it doesn't take off a lot of material, not compared to some of the others. Especially not compared to one of these. This is a belt sander. This is quite an old one, and again I've connected a bit of hose pipe to it so that I can connect it straight to the hoover when I need to. It takes off a huge amount of material. You can practically cut slots in wood with this, but it's noisy, it's dusty, and it needs connecting to a hoover. The discs, the sanding sheets aren't very expensive, or the sanding belts aren't very expensive, and it is what it is. The Makita ones are very good. I think Bongo's got a Makita one. This is, as I say, this is an old Bosch one. Works very well. It was one of the ones that was made in Switzerland. I think they've now moved their manufacturing to China, so I can't say what the new ones are. This is very solid, years old, still works fine. One of the other sanders I've missed out is one of these. These get a lot of bad press. It's a detailed sander, and it's a mouse sander from Black & Decker. They advertised them heavily 15, 20 years ago, and they do get slated. But I've used this one quite a lot. Bloody noisy, because it's bloody cheap. It was 15 or 17 quid with a lot of accessories, including the sanding pads. Doesn't come with the patented hose pipe to connect it to the hoover, but again, that cuts down on the dust enormously with a bit of duct tape. They vibrate because they've got plastic pins inside, so it's an off-center rotation inside, and it moves the plastic pins. Eventually they do wear out. If you press on them too hard, the plastic pins can snap. But they're 17 quid, and they're well worth having. You can get into corners, you can get into the spindles, you can get into the middle of the spindles. Very useful thing to have. On par with, certainly on par with the Machine Mart Delta sanders, and very good. For the money, they're fine. I wouldn't pay much more than 20 quid for one, but they are a bargain for what they are. One of the other sanders that people who've got them really like, and people who don't have one can't see a point to them. They are these files, electric files. They're belt sanders basically, but they're very useful. They can cut off a huge amount of material. You can use them for filing steel, any metal, any wood. They pretty much go through anything, and they can be vicious. Not on your fingers, but they can take off a huge amount of material. So the Black & Decker one has its own integral filter that can be emptied to try and keep down the dust, because obviously a belt sander that sticks out is going to throw dust everywhere. Variable speed, and not too bad. The Evolution one, I prefer this one. It's easier to connect a hose to it, as you can see. More duct tape, more hose. Bit quieter, bit less vibration, and the arm itself has got a steel bearing in the end and steel guides. On the Black & Decker, they're plastic guides, plastic runner, and a rubber bearing, a rubber coated bearing in the end. So after prolonged use, if you're cutting hardwood, metal, that can heat up and it can delaminate. I've had one delaminate and I had to buy another arm, whereas the Evolution seems a bit more robust. Again, variable speed. They are what they are, but if you don't have one, I would seriously put it on your Christmas or birthday list. They're around about 40 quid, 45 quid, and well worth having. Okay, got a couple of oddities now. This is a Black & Decker cushion wheel with a sanding belt on it. I've seen a lot of people use these, seen them on TV. Salvage Hunter, one of their guys who does restoration, uses these quite a lot, and he made a new horn for a rhinoceros with one of these. They're quite safe, good for exfoliation on the hands, but they can be used in all sorts of situations, to take an edge off, to even sharpening shears, that sort of thing. Very useful. If you don't have a sander or you don't have a belt sander, then they're worth looking at. They connect to any old drill. So if you don't want more power tools, if you haven't got the space for more power tools, try something like this. Next, if you've got a huge amount of material to take off, more than a belt sander, then you can try a sanding disc in a grinder. Flat wheel, different grits. You've seen them to take paint off cars, but they can also be used to take off a huge amount of material off a piece of wood. They work in the same way as pretty much anything else, but it's the speed of rotation. The only thing I would say is an angle grinder can bite, so be careful when you use one, if you think about using one of these. Very useful, but very rough cuts. Similarly, well, at the opposite end of the scale rather, manual hand sanders. These have got a place in this review because I find these very useful. They can give you an excellent finish if you use a smooth paper, just to get that final finish, or denib what you've just osmoed. Very useful, and only a few quid each. Right, the last two sanders I'm going to try and explain are bench sanders. Now, this is the sort of thing you'd see in a workshop. I bought this at a boot sale. I won't tell you how much because you'll all be envious. Only thing was the angle gauge was missing. Not my mitre gauge. Being a professional machine designed for extended use, it's quite quiet. By comparison, it's very quiet. It's got a brake on the top, so you can slow it down once you've turned it off. The new ones all come with guards fitted, I believe, but I'm not too sure on the Machine Mart ones. The Records ones certainly do, and we had a bit of a discussion this week whether they should actually have one or not. Again, they can bite. You don't need much to take a nail off. If you catch yourself there, they'll whip your fingers up and possibly take a nail off. Not to be taken lightly, but extremely useful in a workshop. They produce a massive amount of dust. Dust extraction is a problem with these unless you've got a decent hoover. Roy Davey this week suggested how to build a shroud. He was one of our new members, which was good. He produced a shroud where he gets very little dust, he says, which is very good. They're very heavy and they're not easy to move around. So if you're restricted mobility or just getting a bit old, then they're quite heavy. I've had one of these for years. This was an Axminster budget model by Perform. I think it was their budget range. It's recently been serviced. I put new bearings in and it's all been oiled up and it works well. Again, needs dust extraction when you use it. The dust goes over there, but it can be used to sand metal, wood. You can use the edges to cut your curves. You can cut mitres on the edge or sand mitres on the edge and at any angle. This plate can be adjusted. I've got mine set for 90 degrees with some strengthening underneath. Again, because it's budget, it's a little bit noisy, but I think they're all pretty much the same. They all work in the same way, so I can't see how you can quieten it down. My last explanation of sanders in my sander summary is a Bobbin sander. This one's from Rutland's at around about £100. It's got interchangeable bobbins, different sizes, so you can sand off internal grooves or even go around corners, I suppose, if you want to, run along edges. This one the table doesn't adjust. Some of the new ones they do, but obviously the price goes up. Being a budget, again, it's quite noisy, but not too bad. The noise resonates in the plastic case, so maybe a bit of padding or something inside, or maybe putting it in a shroud would be better. Bobbin goes up and down, so you don't just wear one spot. You can add bits of wood to the top, so you can even use the top of the bobbin if you need to. As I say, interchangeable bobbins, interchangeable grits. They work well, and at 100 quid, not too bad. The new ones have got belts across the top, so you get a piece of a belt sander that works pretty much in the same way as the Axminster one, but you only get 3 or 4 inches of it, but that makes the whole unit a little bit bigger. I'm quite happy with this one. I think that should cover pretty much anything. If you've got any questions, as ever, put them on Woodworking UK and we'll try and answer any comments you've got or any questions you've got. Thanks very much.